Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would answer one of the questions I've been getting lately. Now that I've started doing my own dynamic effort work again, I've rotated it back in. Uh, and this is something I've answered before, and I'll probably have to make videos on this again in the future just to keep them in the feed because people will continue to ask. Is can you do speed work without bands and chains? And the answer is yeah, I have clients who do it. Not a problem. Now, in a perfect world, are bands and chains better? Yes. Do they give us more variety of tools available? Yes, absolutely. Can you do it without them and make it work? Of course you can. You have to adjust the percentages. So generally, what's our baseline percentage for speed work with bands and chains? Well, usually we run a 3 week wave, your baseline, and this needs to be adjusted based upon your speeds and everything else, but usually our starting point is to do 50% of our 1 rep max on week 1, 55% on week 2, 60% on week 3 for the speed work. And we add 25% of our max in band or chain weight. So in other words, if your max is 400 pounds on an exercise, we would do 200 pounds plus 100 pounds of bands or chains on week 1. So it's basically 200 pounds at the bottom and 300 at the top if you have a 400-pound max. And that's how we do speed work. And people probably notice that in some of these where I'm doing the chains. This isn't just 20 or 30 pounds of chains, guys. We're getting up there. We're getting up there. There's like 80 pounds of chains on that bench. So 125 pounds of chains on those deadlifts. So we do the same thing with band tension. And people don't always realize that when they see people doing speed work. They don't realize that we're using a ton of accommodating resistance for it. Because again, we accelerate out of the bottom as hard, and then it doesn't matter if we're dealing with a heavy weight at the lockout. We accelerate into it. So when we remove the bands and the chains, it can be done with raw work. What I will point out is that you need to be careful of certain things. You need to be very, very careful of letting bars fly. In other words, if you're going to do some sort of goofy suicide grip or something on the bench, that's not going to work. You need to be gripping that bar and squeezing the hell out of it. Because when we don't have the accommodating resistance at the top, weights tend to be extremely light. Okay, they'll almost fly out of your hands on the bench if you're doing it correctly. If you speed squat correctly, raw, you better have a hold of that bar at the top because it's going to fly off of your back. It's going to go a few inches in the air and land back on top of you. Okay, that's not ideal. So when we're setting up our waves, we just adjust percentages. Okay, we adjust percentages. We work with, as a starting point, and this can be adjusted, 60% of your max, 65% of your max on week 2, 70% of your max on week 3. This is how I do my guys. It works just fine. Now you'll get people who will say, well, you could go a lot higher for speed work. And it's not speed work at that point. Because you'll see people are like, why don't you use 80%? It's like, okay, you do 10 triples at 80%. We're getting up to just basically 10 by 3 again. We don't care about maximizing tension on speed work. We care about maximizing force production. And yes, it still works. We still get upper threshold muscle fibers. If you do a triple with 60% of your 1 rep max and you explode as hard and as fast as you possibly can, what do you think happens? You hit upper threshold muscle fibers on rep 1. Okay? You hit them. And when we run it that way, we take short breaks. It's very, very high work density. Speed work helps get you into shape. Because we're doing high set doubles, triples, sometimes singles, you get into shape. You keep those breaks short. Because it's not necessary to have long breaks. Because normally we say, well, longer breaks let you lift more weight. Well, yeah, if you're trying to maximize weight on every set for mechanical tension, which for some hypertrophy training does make sense. But in the case of speed work, we want work density. We want power. We want conditioning. All of those things from it. So that's how we do it. We set it up into 60, 65, 70% for your 3 waves. And we do high sets, 8, 10, 12 sets. And a good starting point. Let's say you have someone who's fairly novice at it. I could just do 10 sets, right? We could do 10 triples on bench, 10 doubles on box squats, 10 singles on their deadlift. And we can adjust those numbers. And a lot of times, my guys who are a little more advanced, we manipulate the number of sets. We'll start with higher sets and then work lower sets as we go heavier with each wave so that we can maintain maximum power and speed on them. And we end up with very similar workloads, right? We end up with a very similar tonnage with very similar velocity curves. Because as you do too many sets with a given weight, you start slowing down. And that's one of the problems that we have when people try to go to, oh, let's just do 80%, right? They do that, and what happens? They get 3 sets deep and they have no speed anymore. They start needing 5-minute breaks to regain any sort of speed. Right? This is not what we want. Because let's come back over to the whole concept with conjugate system or the West Side system. We train our performance elements separately. Okay? Our max work is heavy. And when we say heavy, it doesn't mean a weight you can do 3 reps. If you can do a weight for 3 reps, it's not heavy. It doesn't matter that Chris Duffin can do 950 for a triple on the squat because that's not heavy for him because he can squat more than 950. See where I'm going with this? If you can do 400 pounds for 3 reps, it's not heavy. I don't care what the exercise is. If you can do it 3 times, it's not truly heavy. I don't care if it's a curl. If you can do 3 reps, that's not that heavy. So the West Side type system, your heavy work is truly heavy. We're talking about hitting 95% plus of your 1 rep max. All the way up to 100% of your 1 rep max. You shouldn't be able to do 2 reps with whatever you use. Okay? Max work is truly heavy. Okay? Speed work is truly fast. You can't move 80% of your max that fast. We don't want it so light that we're not getting a training effect, but we want it light enough that you can explode with that weight so hard that the bar fraps on every single set with short breaks. Okay, it needs to be explosive. And our rep work and hypertrophy training is truly fatiguing. We want metabolic fatigue. Hey, we separate these 3 performance elements and we train all of them inside of the same weeks. And max work is done with what? Max work is done with assistance movements in this system. Sometimes your classic movements. More of it's done with your assistance movements. Speed work is done with benching, box squatting, and these can be variations of them, and generally sumo deadlift or maybe deficit deadlifts. Okay? They're both very appropriate. They can both be used very appropriately for it. And you can use some different variation. Sumo deadlifts are usually your baseline for speed pulls, but it can work quite well with deficit deadlifts. However, don't neglect your sumo strength and wide stance strength to do it. But yeah, you can do these things raw, but you need to get the percentages right. And if you can't move the weight fast enough with the 60, 65, 70%, you might need to go down, depending upon your own explosiveness. And that's got to be assessed. Sometimes it'll be different on different exercises. But that's a good starting point. What else can you do with it? Well, if someone is really out of shape, you can do 5x5s with 60 seconds break. If you run those same percentages and make them do 5 sets of 5 with 60 seconds apart on some of those lifts, they'll be out of breath. It'll get you in shape even faster. Now, it doesn't have the benefit of the more first reps. You don't get better setup practice. Okay, so there are some disadvantages to that method. It's inferior for helping develop your skill. It's a little better for conditioning for people who lack it, though. Hey, if you have someone who has no conditioning and you make them do 5x5 box squats with 60 seconds break using those percentages, they'll be on the ground if they're out of shape. So those can be good for conditioning. But otherwise, I mean, you can play around with it. You can swap exercises. Instead of having different bands and chains, you can do different exercises. You can adjust grip width on the bench. Maybe if you have access to a couple different bars, right? Like I use the Buffalo bar here. You rotate that with a straight bar. Do different box heights. You can rotate sumo deadlift with deficit deadlift. Okay, you can have some variation to achieve the different waves so that you get slightly different 3-week waves. But it can be done without bands and chains. It's better if you have them, but it can still work without them. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.